Good evening, I'm Bill Malugin, and this is your Fox News Report. TSA...
Here's the windshield.
That's right in the center. Another one, and another one.
War has erupted between Iran and Israel, and the situation is escalating faster than anyone expected. Missiles are being launched, air defenses are firing, and the entire region is on edge as the conflict unfolds in real time. But beyond the war itself, something else is changing. Quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Subtle shifts in patterns, in timing, in the way events are beginning to connect. Jerusalem now stands at the center of it all, not just as a location in conflict, but as a point where multiple forces seem to be converging at once. And the question is no longer what is happening in Jerusalem. The real question is, why now? Before we continue, if you find this topic meaningful, if you feel that God brought you to this video, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the revelations to come. And it wasn't just what happened, it was where it happened. Because if these same events had taken place anywhere else, they might have seemed unusual, but still explainable. A storm, a shift in weather, natural changes. But this wasn't anywhere else. This was Jerusalem. Jerusalem has never been an ordinary city. It sits at the center of history, belief, and conflict all at once. Every part of it carries meaning far beyond the physical, and that's why location matters. At the heart of it stands the Temple Mount, one of the most sensitive and significant places on earth. A place constantly watched, controlled, and surrounded by tension. Not just political tension, but something deeper, historical and spiritual. The Bible itself points to this weight. In Zechariah 12:3, it is written, "I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all peoples. All who lift it will surely hurt themselves." Not a place of ease, but of pressure, of conflict. Nearby stands the Western Wall, where people come daily to pray, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, equally sacred. Different meanings, same ground. And that overlap creates constant tension. So when something unusual happens here, it doesn't feel random. Because Jerusalem has never been just a location. It's a point where everything connects. And when something shifts here, it rarely stays small for long. While the sky over Jerusalem refused to settle, the world beyond it was already on edge. Because none of this was happening in a vacuum. Long before the storm appeared, long before the weather began shifting in ways people couldn't explain, tension across the Middle East had been building, layer by layer. Statements turned sharper. Warnings became more direct. Movements that once stayed behind closed doors started appearing in public view. At the center of it stood two names that have defined the region's balance for years: Israel and Iran. The distance between them was no longer just political, it was strategic. Military analysts began tracking changes that didn't look routine: increased readiness, redeployments, signals sent, not through words but through positioning. Systems were being adjusted, defenses recalibrated. The kind of preparation that doesn't happen overnight, and doesn't happen without reason. Warnings followed, not quiet ones, not internal ones. Public statements began to reflect a shift in tone, less diplomatic, more definitive. Lines were drawn more clearly. Consequences were outlined more directly, and with each statement, and the space between possibility and action seemed to narrow. And for many, this rising tension echoed words written long ago. In the book of Matthew, it is written, "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. Matthew 24:6-7. Not as a prediction of a single conflict, but as a pattern that unfolds over time. But what made this moment different wasn't just the tension itself. It was the timing. Because as these warnings circulated, as strategies were being formed, as both sides prepared for outcomes no one openly wanted, but no one ruled out, something else was happening. At the same time, above Jerusalem, the weather had already begun to change. Patterns were breaking. Events were unfolding in ways that felt disconnected from normal explanations. And yet, they were happening within the same window of time as a rising geopolitical strain that had the potential to reach far beyond the region. That overlap mattered, because conflict in this part of the world rarely stays contained. It doesn't remain between two sides. It expands. Alliances begin to activate. Interests begin to align. Global powers begin to respond, not always immediately, but inevitably. Economic systems feel the pressure. Energy routes come into focus. Strategic locations gain new weight overnight. And suddenly, what began as regional tension carries global consequences. That's why the world was watching. Not casually, not from a distance, but closely. Because history has shown that when this region shifts, it rarely does so quietly. The ripple effect is immediate. Markets react. Governments respond. Non-military presence increases. Not always visibly, but measurably. And in moments like this, even uncertainty becomes a factor. Because uncertainty creates space for escalation. And escalation rarely follows a predictable path, which is what made the timing of everything so difficult to ignore. Because while the sky behaved unpredictably, while the ground showed subtle signs of change, while patterns no longer aligned the way they should, the political atmosphere was already unstable, already tense, already close to a threshold. And that's where another line of Scripture begins to resonate. In 1 Thessalonians, it says, "While people are saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly." 1 Thessalonians 5:3. A moment of calm, followed by something else, not gradual, not expected, sudden. And that's what defines this moment. Not just the presence of tension, but the sense that it could shift at any time. Because this wasn't one event. It was multiple layers unfolding together. Natural, political, structural, individually explainable. But collectively, harder to dismiss. Because the question isn't just whether tension exists. It always does. The question is, what happens when that tension aligns with everything else? When instability isn't limited to one domain, but appears across multiple levels at the same time. That's when attention sharpens, because that's when patterns begin to matter. And in this moment, the pattern wasn't calm. It wasn't stable. It wasn't isolated. It was building. The world wasn't calm when this happened. It was already on edge. What begins in one place doesn't stay there. Not here. Not anymore. And because when tension rises around Jerusalem, it doesn't remain a regional issue. It doesn't stay confined to borders or contained within headlines. It moves, quickly, quietly at first, then all at once. Reactions begin almost immediately. Governments start issuing statements, some cautious, some direct, others deliberately vague, but all signaling the same thing. Attention has shifted. The situation is being watched, analyzed, measured in real time. Diplomatic channels open. Emergency discussions begin. Alliances that once seemed distant suddenly become relevant again. Because no country sees this as isolated. They can't. Not when the implications reach beyond geography. Economic systems feel it first. Markets respond not to what has already happened, but to what might happen next. Energy prices begin to fluctuate. Trade routes are reevaluated. Strategic choke points, once taken for granted, become fragile overnight. Investors don't wait for confirmation. They react to uncertainty. And uncertainty spreads faster than any confirmed event ever could. At the same time, political pressure builds. Leaders are forced into positions, sometimes before they're ready. Decisions that would normally take weeks are compressed into hours. Public messaging shifts tone. Words are chosen carefully, not just for what they say, but for what they imply. Because in moments like this, language becomes strategy, and strategy becomes signal. Then comes the military layer. Movements that are rarely visible begin to increase. Surveillance intensifies. Defensive systems are placed on higher alert. Naval routes are monitored more closely. Airspace becomes more controlled, or more restricted, more watched. Not all of it is announced, but much of it is noticed. Because global systems are interconnected in ways that don't allow for silence anymore. One shift triggers another. One response leads to a counter-response. And before long, what started as a localized tension begins to form a chain. Not chaotic, but sequential, like pieces falling in order. A single development, followed by a reaction, followed by a precaution, followed by another shift. That's how it spreads. Not through distance, but through connection. And that's the part that often goes unnoticed. Because it doesn't look like escalation at first. It looks like adjustment. Until enough adjustments stack together and the pattern becomes visible. A pattern that isn't random. A pattern that moves with direction. And this is where the idea of a domino effect becomes more than just a metaphor. Because each piece doesn't fall independently. It falls because something before it moved first. And once that sequence begins, stopping it becomes harder with every step. That's what makes moments like this so significant. Not just the event itself, but the reactions it triggers across systems that were never meant to move all at once. Economic, political, military, all responding, all adjusting, all connected. And the more they respond, the clearer it becomes that nothing here exists in isolation. Not anymore. Because what happens in one place is no longer contained by distance. It's carried through networks, through decisions, through consequences. And by the time the full picture becomes visible, the movement has already begun. Not spreading, but linking. A piece by piece, system by system, until the distinction between local and global disappears completely. It wasn't spreading randomly. It was connected. If you're starting to see how all of this fits together, stay with me to the end, like this video, and share your thoughts below. Because what comes next might explain even more than what we've already seen. But as the conflict unfolds in the skies above, something far stranger began falling from them. Hail. It didn't build the way storms usually do. There was no slow gathering of clouds, no gradual shift in the wind, no warning signs that gave people time to prepare. One moment, the sky over Jerusalem was still, heavy but quiet. And then, almost without transition, it changed. Dark clouds pulled in fast, tightening over the city as if drawn to a single point. The light dimmed in a way that felt unnatural, like something had been switched off rather than covered. People looked up expecting rain. What came instead was something else. The first hailstones hit without hesitation. Loud, solid, sudden. They struck rooftops, cars, stone pathways, each impact sharp enough to echo through the narrow streets. Within seconds, the sound multiplied, turning into a constant barrage. Ice hitting ancient stone. Ice bouncing across metal. ice cracking against glass. It wasn't scattered. It was concentrated, aggressive, sustained, and it didn't ease in. It arrived at full intensity. Then the lightning began. Not distant flashes on the horizon, but immediate, repeated strikes, cutting across the sky in rapid succession. The kind that lights up everything at once. The walls, the streets, and the faces of people caught outside, again and again, too fast for comfort. Thunder followed instantly, overlapping, rolling without pause. There was no rhythm to it, no spacing, just continuous impact. Rain came next, heavy and forceful, pouring down as if released all at once. Within minutes, water rushed through the streets, filling low areas, pushing debris along paths that have existed for centuries. The narrow alleys of the old city turned into channels, carrying everything in their way. People reacted quickly, but not because they were prepared. Shop owners pulled down shutters mid-storm. Pedestrians pressed themselves against walls, searching for cover that wasn't already exposed. Cars were abandoned where they stood. Phones came out instinctively, not to capture something beautiful, but to record something that didn't feel normal. Because it wasn't just the intensity, it was the speed. There had been no build-up, no transition, no moment to register what was happening before it fully arrived. It felt less like weather forming, and more like weather appearing. And for some, this moment carried a deeper echo. In the book of Exodus, there is a passage describing a storm unlike anything seen before. The Lord sent thunder and hail, and fire ran down to the ground. There was hail, and fire mingled with the hail, very grievous, such as had not been in all the land. Exodus 9:23-24. And in Book of Job, another line speaks of something held in reserve. Have you entered the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? Job 38:22-23. To many, these are ancient words, historical, symbolic. But standing beneath a sky that behaves without warning, they don't feel distant. They feel familiar. Later, experts would step in. Meteorologists would point to pressure systems, temperature shifts, atmospheric instability. They would explain how hail can form rapidly under certain conditions, how lightning clusters can intensify within compact storm cells. And individually, those explanations made sense. But they didn't answer everything. Not the timing, not the concentration, not the way it seemed to arrive all at once, fully formed. Because storms follow patterns. They evolve. They move. This one didn't feel like it followed anything. It came fast. It hit hard. And it behaved in a way that people couldn't easily recognize. And long after the rain began to slow, that was the part that stayed. But not just what happened, but how it happened. Storms don't usually behave like this. Not here, not like that. The storm passed, but the pattern didn't return. That was the first sign something was different. Because normally, after an extreme weather event, the system resets. The sky clears. The air stabilizes. Conditions return to something predictable, even if only temporarily. But this time, that reset never fully came. Instead, the shifts continued, subtle at first, then harder to ignore. Temperatures began changing faster than expected. Warm air would settle briefly, only to be replaced by sudden drops that didn't match the time of day. The sky would clear, then darken again without warning. Winds would rise and fall without direction, as if disconnected from any larger system. It wasn't just unstable, it was inconsistent. The weather has patterns. That's how it's understood, measured, predicted. Systems move in cycles. Pressure builds, releases, transitions. There is always some form of progression, even in chaos. But here, that progression felt broken. There was no clear sequence, no transition, no build-up, just shifts, abrupt, unsignaled, out of rhythm. One moment calm, the next, something else entirely. And it wasn't happening once, it was repeating. Across different parts of the city, at different times, the same thing was reported. Sudden changes that didn't connect cleanly to what came before. People began noticing it not because of how dramatic it was, but because of how irregular it felt, like pieces that didn't fit together. Meteorologists again offered explanations: microclimates, pressure pockets, localized instability, and under normal conditions, those explanations would be enough. But something about the timing and the frequency made it harder to dismiss, because these weren't isolated fluctuations. They were stacked, layered one on top of another, without a clear pattern linking them together. And while the sky continued to shift above Jerusalem, something else began drawing attention. Closer to the ground. Along the eastern wall of the old city stands a structure that has remained unchanged for centuries. The Eastern Gate. Sealed, silent, untouched. For generations, it has been closed off completely, its stones fixed in place as if time itself had stopped at its surface. But recently, visitors and observers began reporting something unusual, not dramatic, not immediately visible, but enough to notice. Some who approached the gate described the stone as unusually warm to the touch. Not sun-warmed in the way exposed surfaces often are, but carrying heat that felt contained, almost internal. Others noted faint changes along the structure itself. Subtle lines, small separations between stones that had held firm for hundreds of years. A narrow crack, easy to dismiss on its own, but difficult to ignore given the context. There were also reports, brief, inconsistent, of slight vibrations, not strong enough to be recorded as seismic activity, not visible enough to confirm physically, but enough for those standing nearby to feel something shift beneath their feet. A low, subtle movement, like pressure adjusting rather than breaking. Individually, none of this would stand out. Stone ages, structures shift, temperature fluctuates. But again, it wasn't just one thing. It was the combination, the timing. Because while the sky above Jerusalem refused to settle into any recognizable pattern, the ground, and what stood upon it, seemed to be responding in its own way. And for those familiar with the deeper history of that gate, the location itself added another layer. In the book of Ezekiel, a passage speaks directly about this very place. This gate shall remain shut. It shall not be opened, because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered through it. Therefore, it shall remain shut. Ezekiel 44:2. For centuries, that verse has been interpreted in different ways, symbolic to some, literal to others. But it has always pointed to the same location, the same gate, the same stillness, a structure defined not by movement, but by remaining closed, and which is why even the smallest change draws attention. Not because it proves anything, but because it raises a question. If weather no longer follows its patterns, and structures long unchanged begin to show signs, however subtle, of movement, then maybe the focus shouldn't be on any single event. Maybe it should be on the shift itself. Because this wasn't just extreme, it wasn't just unusual, it was inconsistent, and inconsistency is where patterns begin to break. On their own, none of these events demand a conclusion. A storm can be explained, weather can shift, political tension can rise, structural changes can occur over time. Each piece, taken separately, fits within a framework people already understand. There are systems for all of it: models, data, precedents. And in isolation, those explanations are enough. But something changes the moment they are placed together. Because this wasn't one event. It wasn't even a sequence that unfolded slowly. It was multiple developments appearing within the same window, overlapping in a way that makes separation difficult. The timing stands out first, not because events happened, but because they happened at the same time. The storm didn't come weeks before the tension. The tension didn't rise long after the shifts in weather. They existed together, within the same frame, without clear distance between them. And timing matters. Because coincidence becomes harder to claim when events don't just occur, but align. Then there is location. Not a wide region, not scattered across multiple cities, but centered around one place: Jerusalem, a city already known for its weight, its visibility, its history. If these same events had appeared across unrelated locations, the connection would weaken. But they didn't. They concentrated. And that concentration adds pressure to the question. Frequency adds another layer. Because it wasn't a single shift followed by calm. It was repetition. Weather changing, then shifting again. Tension rising, then tightening further. Subtle changes appearing, then reappearing. Not identical, but consistent enough to form a rhythm that doesn't feel accidental. And this is where perception begins to change, because the human mind is built to recognize patterns, not to invent them, but to detect them when they exist. And when multiple variables, timing, location, frequency, begin to overlap, the question naturally forms. Not forced, not dramatic, just unavoidable. Are these events independent? Or are they connected in ways that aren't immediately visible? Because coincidence explains one thing, maybe two. But when layers begin stacking, when events appear together, in the same place, within the same period, the explanation starts to strain. Not collapse, but stretch. And that tension between explanation and observation is where uncertainty lives. This isn't about declaring meaning. It's about recognizing alignment. Subtle, incomplete, but present. And once that possibility enters the frame, it changes how everything is seen. Because the question is no longer what happened. It becomes something else. Something simpler, but heavier. Coincidence? Or alignment? There are many cities in the world. Many places where events unfold, where history is written, where change begins. But very few carry the kind of weight that Jerusalem does. Because Jerusalem has never simply existed within history. It has shaped it. For thousands of years, it has stood at the intersection of belief, power, and conflict. Not once, not occasionally, but repeatedly. Empires have moved toward it, fought over it, claimed it, lost it, and returned again. It has been destroyed and rebuilt, controlled and contested. And through every phase, one thing has remained constant: attention. Jerusalem is always being watched, not just politically, but globally, spiritually, symbolically. Because what happens here is rarely seen as local. It carries meaning beyond its borders. That's why it has always been a focal point during moments of tension. Not because it causes those moments, but because it draws them. And this isn't new. History is filled with examples where major shifts, conflicts, declarations, to turning points have passed through this city. But what makes this moment different is not the presence of change. It's the speed of it, the compression. Events that would normally unfold over longer periods now appear closer together. Patterns that would once take time to recognize now emerge almost immediately. And alongside that speed is something else: convergence. Different types of events, natural, political, structural, appearing within the same space, within the same time frame. Not identical, not dependent, but overlapping. That overlap is what stands out. Because Jerusalem has always been significant, but significance alone doesn't create alignment, something else has to bring those elements together. And that's where the difference lies. Not in what is happening, but in how it's happening. Because when multiple layers begin to move at once, within a place already known for its weight, it changes how those events are perceived. It raises the question of whether this is just another moment in a long history, or something that fits into a larger pattern. And history offers a clue. Because Jerusalem has never been random. It has always been central. A point where different forces meet, where decisions carry consequences beyond what can be seen immediately, where events don't just occur, they echo, across regions, across time, across systems that extend far beyond the city itself. That's why this place matters. Not because it is unique in structure, but because it is unique in influence. Some places experience history, others define it. And Jerusalem has always belonged to the second category. Which is why moments like this feel different. Not unfamiliar, but intensified. Not new, but accelerated. Because when change appears here, it rarely remains contained. It expands. It connects. It builds into something larger than the event itself. And that leads to a realization that is difficult to ignore. Some places don't just exist in history. They shape it. Not everything can be measured. And not everything needs a visible cause to be real. In Jerusalem, after the storms passed and the sky began to shift in ways people couldn't fully explain, what remained was not just physical change, but something deeper, something spiritual. It wasn't panic, it wasn't chaos, it was a quiet unease that settled over the city, a feeling that something unseen had moved first, before anything visible followed. People returned to their routines, and the streets filled again. Life appeared normal, but inside, something felt different. Not fear of a specific event, but the sense that something was no longer aligned the way it should be. And for many, this wasn't just psychological, it felt spiritual. Because throughout Scripture, God has never spoken only through words. He speaks through creation, through disruption, through moments that break the normal rhythm of the world. In Book of Psalms it is written, "The earth shook and trembled. The foundations of the mountains quaked." Psalm 18:7. Not as random movement, but as response. And in Gospel of Luke, Jesus said, "There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and on the earth distress of nations." Luke 21:25. Not to create fear, but to awaken awareness. That is what makes this moment different. And because the feeling people describe is not tied to what they see, but to what they sense. A weight in the air. A stillness that feels intentional. A silence that doesn't feel empty. Conversations become quieter. Attention sharper. As if something inside people is responding before their minds can explain it. And that is often how God moves, not always through spectacle, but through awareness, not always through noise, but through a shift that can be felt before it can be understood. Because when something begins to change at a deeper level, the first signal is rarely visible. It is internal. It is the moment where people stop and feel that something is not the same, even if they cannot explain why. And in a city like Jerusalem, a place tied to God's presence across generations, that feeling carries even more weight, or because it echoes something that has been written before, not as prediction, but as pattern. A call to pay attention, a call to wake up, not to fear, but to recognize, because sometimes before anything is revealed, before anything is confirmed, there is a moment where God allows people to feel the shift first, not to confuse them, but to prepare them. And that quiet, unexplainable feeling may not be the result of what has already happened, but the beginning of something that has only just started. It didn't happen all at once. It didn't arrive as a single event that could be isolated, explained, and moved past. It unfolded in pieces, one after another, each one small enough to understand on its own, but together forming something harder to ignore. One event, then another, then another. The weather shifted first. A storm that didn't follow the usual pattern, arriving without warning, intensifying without transition, leaving behind more questions than answers. Then the instability continued, not as a single moment, but as a sequence. Temperature changes, sudden shifts, conditions that didn't align with anything predictable. Then attention turned to location, not random, not scattered, but centered around Jerusalem, a place where events are never just physical, where meaning is layered into every occurrence. Then came the tension, rising between Israel and Iran, building in parallel, not after, not before, but at the same time. Warnings, positioning, preparation, all moving forward while everything else was already in motion. Then the reaction spread outward, not as chaos, but as connection. Governments responding, markets shifting, systems adjusting, each layer reacting to the one before it. Not randomly, sequentially, like a chain being pulled, link by link, each movement triggering the next. And that is what defines this moment, not the intensity of any single event, but the way they align. Because nothing collapsed at once. Nothing broke in a way that demanded immediate recognition. But something else happened instead. The structure didn't fall, but it shifted. Quietly. Gradually. Across multiple levels at the same time. Weather, location, conflict, global response, all moving, not separately, but together. And when enough elements begin to move in the same direction, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Not because it is fully understood, but because it is clearly forming. Nothing collapsed at once, but everything started shifting. So, what are we looking at? A storm that didn't follow its rules, a pattern of weather that refused to stabilize, events unfolding in Jerusalem, a place that has always carried more weight than any single explanation can hold. At the same time, tension rising beyond the city itself, spreading across borders, pulling global attention into focus. Reactions forming, systems adjusting, the world watching, not passively, but carefully, because something about this moment feels different. And yet, each piece still has an explanation. Storms can form, weather can shift, nations can move toward conflict, systems can respond. Nothing here is impossible. Nothing here is unprecedented on its own. But that is not where the question comes from. The question comes from the combination, from the timing, from the way these elements appear together, and in the same place, within the same window, without clear separation between cause and effect. Because when events begin to align like this, the discussion changes. It moves away from individual explanations and toward something broader. Something less defined, but more significant. Not a conclusion, but a possibility. And that possibility is what remains. Not proven, not confirmed, but present, and difficult to ignore. Because at some point, the pattern becomes the focus. Not what each event is, but how they connect. And once that connection is seen, the question becomes unavoidable. Are we looking at isolated events, or the beginning of something larger? What do you think is really happening? Coincidence? Or something more? Comment below.
The Temple Mount is in our hands. We are in Jerusalem and we are here to stay.
It was early morning local time when rocket sirens sounded all across central Israel.
Our world has changed rapidly overnight. Many things are becoming obvious, and that fact should cause us to stop and think very carefully about what we're seeing in Jerusalem. Let's get into it. This one is extremely important for a lot of reasons, but perhaps the most consequential reason centers around the fact that God put this on my heart to share with you, knowing what we are facing in these last days. And make no mistake, we are seeing signs at levels we have never witnessed before. Before we continue, if you find this topic meaningful, if you feel that God brought you to this video, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the revelations to come. Right now, as you're watching this, ancient stones seem to murmur in Jerusalem, and the eastern gate, the one Ezekiel declared would remain closed until God himself returns, is moving. Dust drifts down where no wind is present. Subtle vibrations move through ground that has stayed still for centuries. For 2,500 years, this prophecy has remained in waiting. Empires attempted to prevent it. Rulers sealed it behind layers of stone. Generations were buried before it. Yet something beyond human strength appears to be pressing from the other side. And if the witnesses are correct, if these signs are genuine, then what follows could change everything. But first, you need to understand why this gate is more than just stone and mortar. It is a prophetic trigger. In 1969, archaeologist James Fleming was documenting the Eastern Gate when the rain-soaked earth beneath him suddenly collapsed. He dropped 8 feet into darkness. See, looking up from the mud, his flashlight revealed something that should not have been there. Another gate, older, hidden directly beneath the sealed one. Think about that. 2 gates, layered one above the other. One already fulfilled when Christ entered Jerusalem. One still awaiting its moment. But what Fleming uncovered next changed everything. The stones of the lower gate dated back to the time of Jesus, the exact era when prophecy describes a king entering on a donkey, which means the gate visible today, the one showing these strange movements, is not the original. It is the upper structure, aligned with the one believed to be connected to the second coming. And just 3 days ago, something began happening to it, something that has authorities in Israel scrambling to keep it quiet. And footage circulating online shows missiles passing across the skyline of Jerusalem's old city. In those images, several of the most recognizable landmarks in the world appear within the same frame. The golden dome of the rock rises above the city, the western wall stands below it, and only a short distance away sits the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. All of these sacred places exist within the ancient stone walls of Jerusalem, separated by only a small distance. As air raid sirens echoed through the city, explosions were reported close to these historic locations. Power grids worldwide are experiencing identical failures at the same moment each day, 300 p.m. Jerusalem time, for exactly 7 seconds. But then, everything returns to normal. Engineers can't explain it. The grids aren't connected. Different systems, different continents. But they all fail simultaneously, as if something is testing its ability to shut down human technology. The pattern started 40 days ago. Each day the blackout extends slightly. 7 seconds became 8, then 9. If the progression continues, the blackout will last exactly 1 hour. And the hour mentioned in Revelation when the kings of the earth realize their time has ended. Since that day, their witnesses say the phenomena have intensified. Cracks appearing overnight, not random cracks. They form patterns. Hebrew letters, some claim. Others see Arabic script. Depending on who's looking, the stones speak different languages. Dr. Rebecca Harrison, a seismologist from Tel Aviv University, was called to investigate. Her equipment detected something that makes no scientific sense. Vibrations, Dr. Harrison reported. No, but not from tectonic activity. The frequency is wrong. It's rhythmic, but like a pulse centered directly behind the sealed stones, she measured it. 72 beats per minute, the exact resting heartbeat of a human being. The Earth itself has a pulse at this spot, and it's getting stronger. 3 months ago, barely detectable. Last month, strong enough to feel through shoes. This week, visible movement in hanging chains near the wall. But that's not the most disturbing discovery. Ground-penetrating radar reveals hollow spaces behind the seal. But chambers that shouldn't exist, voids in the stone that form a shape. When mapped from above, they create a pattern that ancient texts describe as the footprint of God. The Muslim walk forbids excavation. Israel won't risk the political chaos, so the mystery remains buried, but the signs are surfacing anyway. Last Tuesday, a group of Christian pilgrims from South Korea were praying at dawn when they witnessed something that hasn't happened in 500 years. Moisture. How seeping through the ancient seal, not from rain. Jerusalem had been dry for weeks. The liquid was coming from inside. When tested, the moisture had a salinity consistent with human tears. The tears weren't random. They appeared on Tisha B'Av, the exact day both Jewish temples were destroyed, the same date the Jews were expelled from Spain, the day World War I began, setting the stage for the Holocaust, the most cursed date in Hebrew history. But this time, instead of destruction, and so something much different was trying to break through. Rabbi Shmuel Rabinovich, who oversees King David's tomb, revealed what his father told him 40 years ago. When the stones weep at the eastern gate, count 40 days. What happens next will shake the nations. 40 days from those tears leads to Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the holiest VO day in Judaism, when the high priest would send the scapegoat through this very gate, carrying Israel's sins into the wilderness. The countdown has already started, and strange things are accelerating across Jerusalem. In the translated remarks, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that Israel today stands stronger than it has in many previous periods of its history. He emphasized that the nation has endured decades of conflict, pressure, and uncertainty, yet continues to survive through determination, alliances, and resilience. According to the interpretation that circulated widely online, Netanyahu suggested that the Jewish people will eventually reach what he described as a messianic era. At the same time, he clarified that such a moment would not arrive immediately or suddenly. Nevertheless, once these words began spreading across social media and news platforms, they quickly sparked intense discussion and debate. Some observers interpreted the statement as a direct reference to the future arrival of the Messiah and possibly even the rebuilding of the ancient temple in Jerusalem. Others, however, argued that the translation may have exaggerated the meaning of his remarks. A community clarification later suggested that Netanyahu may have been referring more broadly to the traditional Jewish concept of a messianic age, a future period of peace, restoration, and fulfillment, rather than speaking about the literal appearance of the Messiah in the immediate future. Even so, the conversation that followed raised several important questions. Was Netanyahu speaking symbolically about Israel's long-term future and national resilience? Was he referencing the deep historical hopes within Jewish tradition connected to the Temple Mount? Or could his words hint at something more profound, touching on themes of prophecy that have been discussed for centuries? 2 weeks ago, the reconvened Sanhedrin, the ancient Jewish religious council reformed in 2004, held an emergency meeting. The topic was sealed, but one member leaked the agenda, preparing for temple service. They've been training priests, real Levitical descendants confirmed through DNA testing, to teaching them rituals that haven't been performed for 2,000 years. Why now? Because 3 months ago, a red here was born in Texas. A completely red, no white hairs, no blemishes, the kind required for temple purification, the kind that signals the temple's rebuilding. It was secretly flown to Israel last month. They're waiting for it to turn 3 years old, the biblical requirement for sacrifice. That happens in exactly 40 days. The same 40 days Rabbi Buehrer mentioned. Here's where ancient prophecy meets modern technology in a way that should terrify skeptics. An NAI program designed to analyze biblical texts for patterns discovered something no human ever noticed. The Hebrew letters in Ezekiel's prophecy about the Eastern Gate, when converted to their numerical values, produce a date: September 23, 2024. The programmer, Dr. Michael Stern, ran the calculation 10,000 times. Same result. He checked for errors, had colleagues verify the date doesn't change. What makes this terrifying? Dr. Stern is an atheist. He wasn't looking for prophecy, and he was testing language patterns, but the pattern he found points to a specific moment in time. September 23, 2024 is also Tish 19 in the Hebrew calendar, the 5th day of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, when Jews remember God dwelling with them in the wilderness, when God tabernacled with humanity. If you're following this investigation with us, take a moment to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel as we continue uncovering what lies beneath this ancient river. As tensions in the region continued to escalate, another unusual event began to attract attention. This time, it was the night sky that became the focal point. Several witnesses across the city began reporting something unusual unfolding overhead. Large flocks of ravens and crows were seen circling above different parts of the skyline, moving in restless and chaotic patterns that many residents described as unsettling. Videos quickly began appearing across social media, showing dark clouds of birds sweeping across the sky, sometimes gathering in enormous numbers. For people who witnessed the scenes firsthand, the behavior of the birds did not look like an ordinary migration. Instead, the birds appeared agitated, circling repeatedly and filling the air above the ancient city in a way that caught the attention of viewers around the world. At nearly the same time, another phenomenon was beginning to draw concern across the broader region. And across the world, people are having the same dream. They've never met different countries, different denominations, but the dream is identical. They see a figure in white standing at the Eastern Gate. The stones melt like wax. The cemetery vanishes like morning mist. The figure speaks one word, a word they can't understand, who know means open. Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychologist studying the phenomenon, has documented 1,244 cases. All describe the same details: the white figure, the melting stones, the single word. But here's what Dr. Williams discovered that made her close her practice and move to Jerusalem. The word they're hearing, when phonetically spelled out, is pak, ancient Hebrew for open. People who don't know Hebrew are hearing Hebrew in their dreams, and they're all hearing the same word. For many observers, the sight of both the restless flocks of birds and the expanding Hebrews inevitably brings to mind imagery found in ancient biblical texts. Because of these connections, the events unfolding in the skies above Jerusalem and across nearby regions have raised a question that some people find difficult to ignore. Are these occurrences simply natural environmental patterns that happen from time to time in the Middle East? Or could they be echoing warnings that were written thousands of years ago? Passages that many believers have long associated with moments of profound change in human history? Directly across from the Eastern Gate, the Mount of Olives is splitting. Not metaphorically, literally. A crack now runs 300 feet from north to south. It appeared in 2018, but in the last 3 months, it's widened from 2 inches to 14 inches. Zechariah prophesied this exact split would happen when the Messiah's feet touch the mountain. Scientists blame it on construction, a new hotel, water pipe damage. But the crack doesn't follow construction lines. It runs perfectly east to west, directly toward the Eastern Gate. And here's what the media won't report. Olive trees along the crack are blooming out of season. October olives in Jerusalem are supposed to be harvested, not flowering. But these trees are producing fresh blossoms, white flowers that locals say smell like frankincense. The last time olive trees bloomed out of season in Jerusalem, 70 AD, weeks before the Romans destroyed the temple. But something else is happening that's even more disturbing. Remember Sulian Cemetery? The one he built to stop the Messiah. For 500 years, those graves have been undisturbed. The Muslim tradition forbids moving the dead. But in the past 6 months, something impossible has been documented. The graves are sinking, not from erosion. The ground is dry, not from construction. No one's allowed to dig there. The graves are descending straight down uniformly and as if the earth is swallowing them. Ahmad Rashid, whose family has tended these graves for 7 generations, broke his silence last week. My grandfather warned this would happen. He said, "When the Jewish Messiah comes, our dead would make way." I thought it was a foolish superstition, but now I see it with my own eyes. 23 graves have sunk so far, all in a straight line, creating a path from the Mount of Olives to the Eastern Gate. At the Israeli Antiquities Authority measured the subsidence, each grave has descended exactly 7 feet. 7. The number of completion in Hebrew numerology, the number of God's perfect timing. But Jerusalem isn't the only place showing signs. In Rome, the Arch of Titus, built to celebrate Jerusalem's destruction, developed a crack on the same day the Eastern Gate showed its first fissure. The crack runs through the carved image of the temple treasures being carried away. And in Babylon, modern Iraq, locals report strange sounds from ancient ruins, sounds like trumpets, but no source can be found. In Greece, at Mars Hill, where Paul preached about the unknown God, a long dormant spring began flowing. The water emerged on Pentecost. Chemical analysis shows it matches the mineral content of water from the Pool of Siloam in Jerusalem. That's scientifically impossible. The locations are 800 meters apart. 7 locations. To 7 signs are all connected to places mentioned in prophecy about the end times. Beneath the Temple Mount, something impossible has been detected. Not by archaeologists. They're forbidden to dig there. Was by oil companies using deep earth scanning technology from outside the restricted zone. There's a chamber massive directly under the Eastern Gate, and it's not empty. The scans show metallic objects, gold density arranged in patterns matching the exact layout of Solomon's temple furnishings described in Kings and Chronicles. The ark, the table of showbread, the golden altar, they're all there waiting. But here's what the oil companies won't admit publicly. The chamber is sealed in solid bedrock. No tunnels lead to it. No passages exist. It's completely enclosed, like it was sealed from the inside. The only way to access it straight down through the eastern gate, through the exact spot that's showing cracks. Remember those 144 people with the activated priestly gene? Something new is happening to them. They're developing abilities that violate medical understanding. They can survive without food for weeks. Their wounds heal in hours instead of days. They're showing knowledge they never learned. Ancient Hebrew, temple procedures, sacrificial laws. Dr. Chenway, studying the phenomenon in Tel Aviv, has made a discovery that caused him to abandon atheism. Their DNA is rewriting itself, adding information. Information that matches no known genetic database. It's as if someone is downloading instructions directly into their cells. The instructions, when decoded, they're biblical Hebrew, commands for temple service, to preparation for priesthood, written in genetic code. Pilots flying over Jerusalem at dawn are reporting the same impossible sight for a few seconds, but usually, as the first light hits the Temple Mount, they see it. A massive golden structure, where only the dome of the rock should be, not a reflection, not a mirage. A three-dimensional structure that appears solid, throws shadows, and reflects radar. Then it vanishes. Air traffic control has recorded 17 incidents, all at dawn, all lasting between 3 and 7 seconds, all showing the same structure, a building matching the exact dimensions of Ezekiel's future temple. Captain Ryan Foster, as a former Air Force pilot now flying commercial roads, described it. It's like two realities are overlapping. One moment I see the Islamic shrine, and the next I see a Jewish temple, as if time itself is stuttering between present and future. Every Hebrew word for gate is simultaneously changing meaning in ancient texts, not the physical texts. The words on paper remain the same, but readers worldwide are suddenly understanding them differently. Shar no longer just means gate, yet it now carries the meaning portal between worlds. Dilet doesn't just mean door. It now implies timeline intersection. Pak isn't just opening. It's dimensional breakthrough. Linguists can't explain why millions of Hebrew readers are simultaneously experiencing this shift in understanding. The words haven't changed. Human consciousness has. As if we're being prepared to understand something that requires new definitions. In Ethiopia, the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, yet which claims to house the original Ark of the Covenant, has begun a ceremony they've never performed before. The guardian of the Ark, the only person allowed to see it, emerged after 30 years of silence. His message, return it to Jerusalem. The gate is preparing. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church is arranging the largest military transport in their history. Not publicly, but satellite images show preparation for moving something massive, something requiring leaded containers, something radioactive. The Ark, according to those who claim to have been near it, emits energy that kills the unprotected, the same kind of energy detected beneath the Eastern Gate. Every major bank's AI trading system has identified the same date for total market collapse, September 24th, 2024, the day after the astronomical alignment, and they've all reached this conclusion independently. Different algorithms, different data sets, same result. Oh, but here's what the banks discovered when they tried to prevent it. They can't. Every scenario they run, every prevention measure they model, the collapse still happens, as if it's not an economic event, but a scheduled certainty. The trigger, their models show it starting in Jerusalem. Specifically, at the Temple Mount, a single event that makes all currency, all stocks, all human wealth systems instantly irrelevant. The identical dreams have evolved. Now people aren't just seeing the figure at the gate. They're hearing names, billions of names, every person who ever lived being called one by one. Some dreamers recognize names of deceased relatives. Others hear their own names called. All report the same sensation. When your name is called, you have to respond. There's no choice. The voice compels absolute obedience.